I'm now going to take some questions from the media. I've got a list here, so I'll come to this. I've got Vicky from the BBC. Vicky, first, please.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You're talking a lot about the Conservatives' record, but if the polls are right, it's other parties, including Reform, who are winning over their former voters. Why aren't they turning to you? And I have to ask you for your reaction to tariffs, the overnight news from America.
Well, I think, as I say, 9 months ago, the country voted for change, and that is what we're delivering. The national living wage up £1,400. That's a pay rise for millions of people. Waiting lists that are coming down, potholes that are being filled, wages going up faster than prices, and interest rates coming down. We are beginning to turn the page on this, but we also need to call out Reform, because they talk about workers' rights, they talk about protecting people at work. But what do they do in Parliament? They vote against legislation that would improve the protection that people have at work. They talk about the NHS, but what would they do with the NHS? They want to charge for it. We believe in an NHS that's free at the point of need. It's a fundamental principle. And whilst we are building alliances, the security and defence of Europe with our partners, what are they doing? They're fawning over Putin, who is the aggressor. They're fawning over Putin. And that's the difference between us. And that's why it's so important that if anybody wants the change that we're bringing to the country in their community, to vote Labour on May the 1st. On the separate issue of tariffs, we are taking a calm approach, acting in the national interest. And the national interest is to continue our negotiations for a deal with the US, which we made big progress on, and to ensure that we work with the sectors and the industries most impacted. And that's why, amongst other things, I had a round table for some of those businesses this morning. But we must act in the national interest. A trade war is in nobody's interest, in my view. But of course, we have to protect ourselves, and that's why we're keeping all options on the table. Thank you very much, Vicky. I've got Harry from ITV. Harry.
Thank you, Prime Minister. On tariffs, you are dealing with someone in Donald Trump who is clearly extremely unpredictable, and you've talked about how you're trying to continue negotiations to get a trade deal. It's not obvious at this stage that your strategy is working. Are you worried that you're being played here?
No. Look, we've got a long, deep and close relationship with the United States that we've had for decades. On defence, on security and on intelligence sharing. We work more closely as two countries than any other two countries in the world. And therefore it's important we preserve that special close relationship. The same when it comes to the economy and trade. There's a huge amount of trade between us. And I think that, nobody wants a trade war. I need to act in the national interest. And the choice before us was whether to jump into retaliatory action with both feet at the get-go, or to continue with our calm approach of trying to negotiate a deal that will mitigate the tariffs. I think the second course is the right course. I'm fortified in that because all the businesses that I'm talking to intensely, particularly those from the most impacted areas, they agree that that's what they think we should do. So I think that confirms that our approach is the right approach. I accept that we need to go further. I accept that we need to preserve our options, which is why all options are on the table. But I think for the immediate task, that is to secure that deal to mitigate the tariffs if we can, and that's what the sectors want us to do. And so I'm continuing to do that. I think jumping straight into a trade war, I know others are saying, why don't you go straight into a trade war from day one, from the get-go? I don't think that will be in our national interests. But I do think we do have to preserve our rights, which is why we are keeping all options on the table. Thank you, Harry. Beth from Sky.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Donald Trump said his tariff announcement will go down as one of the most important days in American history as he unleashed the biggest change in global trade in a century. You know that this is a massive and profound moment. You've also said that there will be an economic impact, but you know how big this is. So can you please explain in concrete terms for working people looking at all of this overnight, what does it mean for them? What does it mean in terms of jobs? What does it mean in terms of their bills at the supermarket, in terms of public services, in terms of taxes? And just quickly, you keep saying all options are on the table. Back in the House of Commons, your business secretary has just announced a formal consultation with business on retaliatory tariffs. How long are you going to give it until you actually do retaliate? Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. There's a lot bound up in that question, but it's a big discussion and it's a big set of issues, so I accept that. Look, in relation to what I say to working people and to businesses, I say we are acting in your absolute best interest, and that's what I mean by the national interest. A trade war is bad for working people and bad for our businesses, and I don't think we should jump straight into a trade war. I think it is better if we're able to negotiate a better outcome, and that's what we are attempting to do. I do think, just to go back to the beginning of your question, there's a really important moment here that we need to understand. Because over the last few months, we've been talking about a new era when it comes to defence and security, particularly collective defence and security, and recognising that we are in a changing world, going into a new era, and therefore we have to act and lead differently. We're at a similar point for trade and the economy. This is not just a short-term tactical exercise. It is the beginning of a new era. And we need to understand that. Just as we've understood it for defence and security, we have to understand the changing world when it comes to trade and the economy. And I'm very concerned that we get this argument out there, because it means that we have to adapt in ways which go beyond the mere question of tariffs. And that's why I've instructed my team to go further and faster on what we need to do to put more resilience and more strength into our economy. And again, I say that to working people and businesses. In addition to what we're doing on the tariffs, we are now turbocharging the changes that we need to make sure our economy is stronger, is in thriving, and supporting the way it needs to be as we go into a new era, which we are undoubtedly doing. So in one sense, we've got defence and security, a recognition that we're going into a new era. We need the same recognition, in my view, that we're going to a new era for trade and the economy, and that we will lead from the front, as we have been attempting to do with security and defence. Thank you very much. Sorry, on the third part of your question, if we're keeping all options on the table, there are various steps that we need to take in order to keep all options on the table, and that's why we are sensibly doing what is necessary. This is driven, as most things are driven by me, in a calm, collected way with a cool head. This is, the sort of pragmatism that we're very good at in Britain, in my view, which is keeping a level head and coolly, calmly taking the right steps for our country. Thank you, Beth. I've got Archie from The Independent.
Economists have warned that Trump's tariffs are going to wipe out economic growth and wipe out the fiscal headroom that the Chancellor built up in the spring statement. Can you guarantee now that in the autumn budget you're not going to have to come back to benefit claimants to balance the books?
Well, the autumn budget is a long way off, and there's a lot of water under that'll have to go under the bridge before then. Obviously, my job, our job, the government's job, is to take the steps necessary in our national interest, which is why we're focusing on progressing the deal that we've been discussing with the US, making sure that we are in a position to take other measures should they be necessary, but at the same time continuing and turbocharging the work we're doing on growth and reform and changing our economy. And an example of that is what we've been doing on planning, led by the Deputy Prime Minister, which was scored by the OBR as the single biggest scored factor when we had the spring statement last week. So I'm not going to get into what may or may not happen in 6 months' time. My job is to make sure that we're in the best possible position as we go through the challenge, and it's undoubtedly a challenge, of tariffs that were imposed by the United States. Thank you, Archie. I'll go to Jack at The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Jack Elson from The Sun. Last night, the European Union did, in your words, jump 2 feet in and threaten retaliatory tariffs on America. Would you urge them and other countries to follow your approach of being less combative to avoid stoking a global trade war? And just finally, do you secretly think that Brexit has helped us avoid more punitive tariffs, which have been foisted on our European neighbours?
Well, in my experience, it's not wise to go around telling other countries what they should or shouldn't do. Everybody needs to act in their own best interest, and no doubt they will do so. My job is to lead the United Kingdom through this, focused on our best interest. The situation, I mean, we have our own trading relationship with the US. It is actually a fair and balanced relationship if you look at the numbers. And of course, we've got decades worth of a special relationship with the United States. And I think it's by focusing on those features that we can take the necessary steps to secure our economy through hopefully a deal with options on the table if that's not possible, but also by doing the hard yards of turbocharging our economy, working with businesses. These discussions are quite intense with the sectors most impacted as to what we need to bring forward, how quickly we can make changes, because we also need to recognise that this is not a question of tariffs, which is this week's issue, and by next week or next month will be a different issue. This is where we need to recognise we're living in a changing world, which we undoubtedly are, and we intend to rise to that challenge, but also ensure that we are best equipped as a country to ensure that our economy is strong, thriving and in the right place. Thank you, Jack, and I've got Sophie from the Mirror.
Hi, Sophie Huskisson from the Daily Mirror. So you've said you're not ruling out anything in response to Trump's tariffs, but can you confirm to bereaved families of online safety and the British public whether this includes offering concessions on online safety laws and tax cuts for tech billionaires?
Well, we will act in the national interests, but when it comes to online safety, I've recently, even in the last few days, made it clear how important I think online safety is. We had a roundtable with the writer and co-producer of Adolescence on Monday. I think it was a very powerful session, which reinforced yet again the risks and threats of social media, particularly in that case with young boys. Young children, young people. And so, you know, there are issues of the Online Safety Act that are coming into force pretty quickly. They're very important. And we need to look at whether there's other measures that we need to take in relation to online safety. But we'll act, of course we have to act in the national interest, but it's also in the national interest to make sure our young people are safe when they're online. And I think one of the reasons Adolescence was so compelling is because I think any parent or anyone with a relationship with a child, particularly a teenage child, would have felt very strongly that it exposed quite profoundly the risks and challenges, and I don't think we can shrug our shoulders and walk past that, and we won't. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for your warm welcome. Nice to see you. Thank you. How are you doing? Nice to see you.